Congressman Adam Kinzinger's on the line. Congressman, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning, guys. Well, a little bit of snow yesterday.
Yeah, just a little bit, but nothing. A few dozen Advil over the course of the next 3 days shouldn't take care of.
Yeah, that's right. I remember I woke up yesterday morning, and I'm like, I think I can. And I look out my driveway, and it was pretty bad. So had to give a little lower back exercise. It's always good for you.
That would mean reaching for the telephone and calling a staffer over, right?
Well, intern. It's a difference.
Intern.
And I just sit outside in a chair and drink a cocktail.
Yeah, nice job. You missed a spot. Oh, perfect.
There you go. I like it.
How much did you get down by you?
Yeah, I don't know what they're ended up calling, but it's a lot. I mean, it really was a big. And then last night, of course, it drifted, so that's made it more fun. And I have a driveway that is very susceptible to drifting, so that's a nice thing to have. It's really enjoyable.
Absolutely. Congressman Adam Kinzinger with us. Let's talk first. The president's got a budget address today, a spending plan to be unveiled to Congress. Hey, what's a 7% increase in federal spending between friends when we're already...
It's not like we don't have the dough.
Yeah, we can just tax the rich more, right?
Right, yeah. It's... Look, the president knows this isn't going to go anywhere, and again, this is the president basically has made it clear that instead of being a president for 2 years and instead of trying to lead the country to some sort of unity and some sort of compromise, his focus is going to be simply politics. So, whether this is just kind of his starting position and he's willing to work with us, maybe, but I just highly doubt that. And look, we have to do something about sequestration. So. The president's partly right in saying we've got to alleviate sequestration on our military because it really is devastating to the men and women in uniform. It's devastating to the long-term ability of our military to be what it needs to be. So keep in mind, Desert Storm, the 90s, and even all 2000s, the reason we had a military that was so good and unchecked was because of the investments that Reagan put into the military in the 80s. It takes sometimes 10 years for those investments to pay off. But, you can't do this by simply taxing people, taxing the rich again, by saying that people need to pay their fair share. What you've got to do, frankly, is look at the long-term spending in this country. And it's a conversation that for some reason nobody's willing to have in the political class, which is, look, Social Security, Medicare, how do we preserve those for current seniors? These programs are going bankrupt in 10 or 15 years, and they're going to drive our debt skyrocketed. So take somebody like me who's 36 years old, make some changes to me in order to save it for current seniors and to save the debt deficit. The president's unwilling to do that because that takes leadership.
Well, and you mentioned, is he willing to lead and compromise, or is it just going to be political? Well, you kind of go with your strengths, you kind of go with what you know, and that's the way it's been all along.
Well, yeah, I mean, they literally, if you think about it, we all know Chicago politics in this state. We know Chicago Democrats. You think about the president, this is all he's basically been, this is all he's known, which is that idea of it's okay to make all your money and to be rich, but once you've made your money, then you want to tax everybody that's trying to make money, that's trying to make a living, because you've already made yours and now you have to feel guilty about it. And by the way, the government's too small. It needs to be way bigger because in their heart, Americans are very, very ungenerous and cold people. And the only thing that can come in and save that is big government. Well, we know that's wrong, but that's really what he believes. And so, of course, he's trying to skyrocket spending, on the backs of those that have gone out and made success. And one more big thing I want to say. He talks about inheritance tax in this country. Mm-hmm. This is something that we've been fighting very hard because I think it's un-American. But you have any farmer that's looking to pass their farm on to the next generation. President Obama is saying, in essence, you need to sell part of that farm to pay the tax for the sin that you did of just simply dying. And that's terrible for our state and terrible for, rural America.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger with us here. It's Riley and Scot on WROK. There was some hope, and perhaps there still is, for tax reform as being part of what happens here in 2015, actually getting it done, not just putting it on the president's desk. So last week during the State of the Union, the president proposes capital gains increase. It was 15 when he got in. He wants to take it to 28. He proposed taxing college savings of regular middle-class, hardworking Americans. That's on the personal side of things. Now, on the corporate side of things, the president wants a 14% tax on overseas earnings, a one-time tax, and then a 19% minimum tax on future foreign profits. For the corporate side, now, do those proposals torpedo the hope that you have for anything getting done in terms of tax reform for the year, or are they an opening open to negotiation?
Well, look, I hope it's an opening to a negotiation. It's not untypical. I mean, you can even see Republican budgets when we put ours out that has, our budget's a very, very conservative document. The president's budget will be a very liberal document. And the goal is that we can kind of find somewhere that, I guess, splits the baby, if you want to put it that way, or something that's at least somewhat tolerable to both sides. But, so that's my hope. But, at the same time, I have not seen anything from the president that would lead me to believe that he wants to work with us. So, is this really, the beginning, or is this just him saying, hey, look, these Republicans, all they care about is the rich and protecting overseas profits and all this kind of stuff, without adequately explaining to the American people, for instance, that there's $2 trillion of American money that's stuck overseas that we want to make easy to bring back and reinvest in the United States. Instead, he says, trying to help overseas earnings. Well, if that $2 trillion, by the way, could come back and be reinvested in the Rockford area and other places in the country, that would be an enormous private sector stimulus. But the president and the Democrats don't want to give up the taxes they can get by that coming back in.
So it would appear as that things set themselves up, once again, and we've heard it more times than I can really count, that budget is DOA, that budget is DOA. We hear that over and over and over again, that, the supposed idea of working together isn't going to work because it's being pronounced dead before it's even looked at.
Well, I hope not. And again, I mean, when we fight, when Republicans and Democrats fight, when the president and Congress fights, it gets a lot of attention. And then, people say, hey, we want you to work together, which I agree with. But then you think about, what happens when we work together. So we got the omnibus bill done, which, frankly, Republicans and Democrats hated the omnibus bill. I think partially because people didn't really know what was in the omnibus bill. That was the thing we passed back in December. But everybody hated it. The Democrats had stuff in there they hated. Republicans didn't like the fact that, we were spending money, which you unfortunately have to do to keep the government open. And they hated it, but that's what compromise is. Compromise and working together means that neither side is going to be completely happy. And, unfortunately or fortunately, in a democracy, in a republic, that's how things, and that's what the Constitution was built for, was for that to work. So if the president can understand that and understand that he doesn't, it's not all about just assuaging his liberal left-wing environmentalist zealot base, and it's about leading this country, we may have some room. But if he just expects us to become left-wing environmental, anti-Keystone zealots, then I think it's going to be a tough couple of years.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger with us. I want to get to ISIS in a second, but you mentioned Keystone. The Senate approved it last week, their version. Are you guys going to take that to conference or probably just approve the Senate's version of that bill?
I'm not sure which. I know some of the amendments in there were, I think for the most part the bill that passed out of the Senate was fine. And it would probably be easier if we just passed the Senate bill. So unless there's something that's completely disagreeable, I think, in fact, there may be with some of these amendments an opportunity to get more Democrats and get us to a veto-proof majority, then we may just pass the Senate bill. The Senate's not veto-proof, but the House may be, which would be kind of nice.
All right, Congressman Adam Kinzinger, Illinois' 16th District, Riley and Scott here on WROK. I want to get into the ISIS and terrorism. And I don't know if you saw this interview the president gave over the weekend with Fareed Zakaria of CNN. If you missed it, I can understand. But this is the clearest, I think, that I've heard the president talk about his philosophy, why he acts the way he acts, why he downplays terror attacks. And he says we don't want to give the terrorist network victories by overinflating their importance and suggesting they are an existential threat to the U.S. We have the truth of the matter is they can do harm, but we have the capacity to control how we respond in ways that don't undercut what is the essence of who we are. That's the first part. I want you to listen, if you would, Congressman, to the second part of this answer, and then we'll get your response. Because, again, I think this is as clear as the president's been, and really his view of how big of a threat ISIS is. And the bottom line is he just doesn't believe it is that big of a threat.
What's required is a surgical, precise response to a very specific problem. And if we do that effectively, then ultimately these terrorist organizations will be defeated because they don't have a vision that appeals to ordinary people. really is, as it has been described in some cases, a death cult or a entirely backward-looking fantasy that can't function in the world. When you look at ISIL, it has no governing strategy. It can talk about setting up the new caliphate, but nobody is under any illusions that they can actually, in a sustained way, feed people or educate people or organize a society that would work. And so we can't give them the victory of overinflating what they do, and we can't make the mistake of being reactive to them. We have to have a very precise strategy in terms of how to defeat them.
Congressman, your response?
Honestly, it kind of makes me sick. And you think about it this way. This was the same president that arrogantly talked about the strategy in Yemen as being successful. And guess what's happened? I've been to Yemen, by the way. The government has fallen. It's given to a Shia militia in Yemen, which is basically Iran. This is the president that's taken Iran. When President Bush was coming out of office, Iran was basically a bit player in the Middle East and has now turned them into a regional power with its hands everywhere in the Middle East. This is the president that in 2011 left Iraq and claimed that we had given Iraq victory, despite everybody in his cabinet saying we needed to leave a residual force there. He knows better because he believes in his mind that ISIS isn't a threat, that people, he doesn't understand power politics. People don't respond to power politics. They only respond to if the president bows to the Saudi king or if he says really nice things, the group will eventually realize, man, I think we've cut off too many kids' heads. It's time to just become good people. That's not how the Middle East works. And the president, despite 6 years of getting his backside kicked in on foreign policy, still believes in sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns, and it's just not going to work. It really is a president that is very dangerous on foreign policy for this country.
And I guess the thing that gets me is when you talk about every member of his cabinet and many, many others on both sides of the aisle, it wasn't strictly Republicans cautioning against this. You had people on both sides saying, some sort of residual force, just an all-out getting out of there is a bad idea. Valerie Jarrett, often called the gatekeeper who decides what he hears and what he doesn't hear, did a fine job of keeping the gate on this one.
Right, exactly. And, look, the president's getting ready to do the same thing in Afghanistan. I know we may be sick of the Afghan war, but look, I think we see Afghanistan a much more manageable place now. I would think if I was the president for 6 years and everything I did on foreign policy was incorrect, if every choice I made was wrong and I saw the world on fire in front of me, then I would finally say, okay, maybe my view of the world is incorrect. What do somebody else recommend we should do? Instead, this president arrogantly throws his jacket over his shoulder, struts out of Marine One, and says basically, "Hey, I'm the cat's pajamas. I know what's going on." And really, it's very dangerous. I think history will judge him as probably the worst foreign policy president we've had in modern history. He's blown in 6 years what it took Americans 60 to 70 years to develop in terms of credibility and world security.
There's Congressman Adam Kinzinger. As always, Congressman, we appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course, guys. Thanks. Enjoyed talking with you.